All right, today we're going to talk about especially Germany, but we will talk about some other areas as well. But we're going to talk about the build-up to World War I. Your textbook talks about this. We did go over this some in our presentation last week. So let me continue on from there. The build-up to World War I. Remember, previously when I talked about how Bismarck unified Germany, right? Through iron and blood, right? That was successful in 1871. Kaiser Wilhelm I works with Bismarck, and they shift from a sort of military approach, which is what they used to unify things, to a diplomatic approach. That was always Bismarck's plan. I think that was always their plan. So basically, this was not a plan for Germany to expand its territory greatly. It was a plan to unify the German-speaking people into one country, excluding Austria, because they knew that wasn't probably going to happen. But everything else. Okay, and that's basically what they did succeed. After that, then, they wanted to build a stability for Germany so it could grow, now a united Germany, and become a great power. One of the things we haven't talked about in here, and again, some of our time, I guess, my talking time is limited, but one of the things we want to remember is there was a philosopher by the name of Hegel, Hegel. Hegel was very popular in Germany in the 19th century. And one of the things that Hegel taught, he basically, Karl Marx stole Hegel's thinking and created communism. And so anyway, so we see then that Hegel's ideas were that history moved along what we might call a line. Okay, that history followed a line. So this wasn't what I intended to talk about today, but I'll use it as an introduction. So history moves in a linear fashion. It has a beginning, it has an end, and God moves it along. Okay? God moves along history. That was according to Hegel. He called that motion then, he called it the dialectic, was sort of what was moving along. The thing that then advanced, there would be a series of conflict and resolution that would then move things forward. Yes? Marx did not believe in God, but he took Hegel's ideas, he took God out of it. He kept the dialectic, he kept the conflict. So anyway, this is what was the idea, and of course Hegel was German. In fact, he was very popular on university campuses in the 19th century. In fact, at university campuses they had the Young Hegelian Society. We haven't started one of those here. We did start the Herodotus Society, but not the Young Hegelian Society. The Young Hegelian Society was very popular. Somebody like Karl Marx will join it, but lots of other students did as well. The idea here is that there was a sort of plan. According to Hegel, it was God's plan moving things forward. He used particular individuals, which Hegel called world historic individuals, to move history forward. People like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte. These would all be world historic individuals, whether they knew it or not. They were thrust into this position of change and greatness, or whatever you want to call it, and that they made significant changes to history. Move things forward. That was what Hegel's all about, was progression. It was moving along a line, and things were moving forward. Now, what happens is, you might also see as it's moving along, there's also a kind of a circular part to it as well. The circular part, or you might see the line is sort of moving like a loop forward. It's going to move through what is called the dialectic. The dialectic then is all about conflict and resolving a conflict. So, for example, when everything is stable, like say we got a system set up, a government or whatever, it's at equilibrium, things are kind of moving forward. There will be some group or power or whatever that will rise up in opposition to what is in place. That tension between what's in place and what is in conflict with it will eventually, that conflict, it might be between two different countries, will result, according to Hegel, in war. War will then take place, and the two different competing ideas will sort of fight it out, and typically the newer idea wins, or some modification of it. Then what happens is that newer idea becomes then the one that's in power, to which arises another resistance, and to which will lead to another war. Okay? And so that's really how Hegel saw things. Now, I tell you that to let you know, to help you understand, I think, what people in Germany were thinking at this time, and what's going to bleed over into what Hitler and others were thinking, is that each age, some dominant power is in control, and it needs change. That change is through warfare. Now, what Marx is going to do is he's going to change that idea, remove God from the picture, and say the dialectic is just material forces, especially economic forces, that drive everything forward, and that we get, bless you, that we get this change coming forward in revolution. So an uprising of the people or the masses, stuff like that. That's going to be Karl Marx's idea. It's going to take Hegel and modify it, atheistic, materialistic forces, but still this idea of what's in place getting opposed. Anyway, so what this idea then does, if you're thinking about this from a German perspective, as many people were in Germany, right, in the 19th century, in 1860s, 1870s, and they see what happens, and Germany is now unified. They're saying that the conflict has come, and that Germany has basically had warfare with France, had warfare with Austria, had warfare with Denmark, as we talked about last time, and now Germany is unified and is an empire. Now, Germany is way behind, say, Great Britain. Great Britain has an empire in 1871 that's far greater than anything Germany will ever have, but it's what they hope to have. And in fact, Kaiser Wilhelm II are both related to Queen Victoria. Kaiser Wilhelm II is the nephew. So they see England as a model. And they believe that it's now the sort of destiny, if you will, that the dialectic has pushed them forward, that God wants them to now be in power. To be quite honest, that's what they would say. Their time had come, and they don't want to spoil it because this is the time. And so Kaiser Wilhelm II is going to want to push that forward, and he doesn't want somebody like Bismarck holding him back. That's the way he's going to see it. He's got a lot to prove, and you watched some of the videos. I think there's one that if you watched that one yet this week, maybe haven't watched it, one on Kaiser Wilhelm II. Anyway, Kaiser Wilhelm II has, he has a bad arm, right? Which always, I think he's always, if you want to try to psychoanalyze people, which I think is tough to do when they're sitting in the room, but even tougher to do when they've been dead for 100 years or so. But anyway, obviously that affected him in his life, not only physically but mentally, and his personality, that he was always trying to compensate or prove that he was, powerful, and having a bad arm that didn't really work, was obviously something that he dealt with every day. No doubt about that. So, but the idea here is that Germany is primed, is ready to move forward, and they're the ones that are going to become dominant. And if they have to fight to do that, that's all right, because that's the way things are made. You make progress, I guess you will, through warfare. This is the Hegelian thinking. And Hegelian thinking is, it definitely fits. It also fits in later on with Hitler. The idea is that Germany is behind. Germany has been sort of left out. Other countries like England, Great Britain, even France and others have greater empires than Germany. Germany's been disunified, fragmented, and stunted in its empire growth. And here is our chance to shine. Okay? So that sets the stage for what I want to talk about today, is that it's what I call Germany's playing catch-up, right? Ketchup. I don't mean the stuff you put on your French fries. Ketchup, hyphenated, C-A-T-C-H -U-P, catch up to the other Western European powers, empires. And so they're looking to expand. And they do expand. They expand into Africa. They expand into China. We don't have time to talk about all that. But they will expand. And they see themselves, they want to build up their navy. Now, this little cartoon, if you can see it, this political cartoon. And I find political cartoons sometimes kind of informative of what people were thinking. This shows Kaiser Wilhelm II. He's on the end of the rowboat here. He's on the end of the boat, see? And then these are the other powers of Europe. What Bismarck had set up was an alliance of powers. He'd gone out and made treaties with Russia. He made assurances to France and others that basically Germany was not going to expand. Germany was not going to grow. That really we just want the German-speaking territories. And so it was critical that he have this kind of alliance. There was an alliance that was set up between Germany, Austria, and Italy. Bismarck set that up. And then he went out and got a treaty with Russia. So they are on good terms with Russia. What does that do? That isolates France. France feels pretty vulnerable at this point because they're kind of in there on their own. And Germany has Austria and Italy and then a treaty with Russia. So the rest of Western Europe, even over into Russia, Eastern Europe, is sort of locked up. And Bismarck has what he feels is a very stable situation for Germany. Okay? This is going to allow Germany to develop its economy, develop its military, develop its empire. And really, the empire they were looking to create is the empire outside of Europe. They weren't necessarily saying, hey, we're going to go conquer France, because they had already defeated France. They gave France back the land. We're going to go conquer these other areas. So they bring Austria into this alliance. So the German-speaking territories of Germany and Austria are together. And they've added Italy. And they have a treaty with Russia. Now, when Kaiser Wilhelm II comes into power, after the first is gone, right? He wants to shake things up. And he doesn't want to renew this treaty with Russia, which needed to be renewed. When he starts saying that kind of thing, it makes Bismarck, well, very upset. Because this is Bismarck's master plan. This is what Bismarck worked on for now, 15, 20 years. And this guy wants to throw it out. It's going to mess everything up. But Kaiser Wilhelm wants to expand to the east. He can't expand to the east if he makes some treaty with Russia saying that, oh, we're not going to have any aggression against you. You don't have any aggression against us. It locks Germany into just what they have in Europe. Kaiser Wilhelm wants that eastern land, like Poland, right? What would be Czechoslovakia later on, so forth. Those territories, that's what he's looking at. He also wants to expand and say, now look, he begins to shake things up. So here the political cartoonist has him standing in a boat with the other European powers. And he's rocking the boat. And underneath it in French, it says the terrible child. L'enfant terrible. The terrible infant, the terrible child. who's causing trouble, shaking up the old alliances. And they're all looking at him like, what are you doing, buddy? You don't stand up in the boat and start rocking it back and forth. You're going to tip it over, that sort of thing. And that's exactly what he wants to do. He wants to upset and turn over what's there into something new. So here's Kaiser Wilhelm and his son. Notice he very carefully does not show his left arm in this photograph, just so you pick up on that. And I think he looks a lot like the current rulers of England, because he is related to them. Like, take a look at early picture of Prince Charles, who will be the next king of England, presumably. They look quite a bit alike, I think. Anyway, they should. They're relatives. This would be Queen Elizabeth's, I guess, would be her cousin. Anyway, Kaiser Wilhelm II in 1890 says there's not going to be any new agreement with Russia. Bismarck is upset with the Kaiser, and basically he resigns. So what does that mean? This signals to Russia that the Germans are thinking about moving to the east, that the Germans, they must be thinking this. We got this new leader who's shaking things up. He's building up his military, and now he doesn't sign an agreement with us. What would you think? You would think, well, he's looking to expand. So Russia starts looking for somebody else to team up with. Guess who they're going to team up with? France. Why? If Russia says, if we team up with France and Germany, if we have an agreement that Germany attacks one of us, there's like attacking both of us, Germany is going to have a two-front war immediately. See? So that ought to be a deterrent. That was the idea. Germany will not want to have a two-front war. So let's make this agreement. And they do. They do. Within 4 years, they have this agreement in place. And very soon, England makes a deal with France. Why? Because England is getting nervous about Germany as well. Why are they nervous? They're nervous because they see Germany building up its military, especially building up its navy. And Britain has the greatest navy in the world, and they don't want any competition. So they said, okay, we're going to team up with France. That'll kind of counter what's going on there in Germany. And then, eventually, England signs a treaty with Russia. So now what you have built between 1894 and 1907 are three countries that basically are there to block Germany and its three-country alliance. Okay? So, new alliances are going to come. This then comes to be called the Triple Entente. The Triple Entente. And of course, remember the other one's known as the Triple Alliance. The Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. Europe is divided up. Now, I want you to know that I slave over a hot computer, and I make elaborate PowerPoints for you that I don't want you to be too stunned by the way it looks. But here it comes. Look at that, huh? A grid. Yes? Well, you'll have to look it up. Well, there it is with an A. Well, we'll check it. But you look at that. Anyway, here you got it. I'm just trying to line it out for you here. The Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Italy. The Triple Entente, Russia, France, and England. Okay, I put versus because really, one is in response to the other. Probably this second grouping, the Entente, would not have happened if, of course, Germany would have stayed the course and made the deal with Russia and hadn't been so building up its military.
They were screwed from the start.
Germany. Well, they had a plan. Their idea, of course, they wanted to avoid a two-front war. That plan did not end up working, right, as we now know. But of course, they had to deal with a similar plan in World War II. Now, it's always easier to look back on things.
Eventually, the United States or the United States will join the Triple Entente by the end of the war.
Yes, that's exactly right. In the end, when the war starts, these become the allies on either side of World War I, except, of course, for our friends, the Italians, who bail on the Germans very, very quick. They never join, and they ended up joining the other side. Yeah. Okay. With an E. All right, well, let's take a look then at the alliances. I have another political cartoon here for you. This political cartoon has down basically, if you can read it, it says Uncle Edward to William. So the King of England is King Edward, who is the uncle of Kaiser Wilhelm. And so the uncle is saying to the nephew, your little marine masterpiece is too ambitious. Keep it a study. So as you can see, it portrays them both as being artists, painters. And the one has a much bigger painting, the other one has a smaller painting. And he's saying, look, you're making your painting too big. In other words, you're making your navy too big. Don't try to copy us. Just sort of imitate us on a much smaller scale if you want to. But don't try to duplicate us. And of course, that's what Germany was trying to do. They were industrializing. They were militarizing. They were building up arms. The idea here was they knew they were going to have, they didn't think they were going to lose, but they knew they were going to have a challenge. Because obviously they got Russia and they've got France. And of course now they got England. They're going to have to deal with it, basically everybody.
And then later on, America.
Much later on, it will be America, yes, towards the end of the war. But what they hope to do is to avoid all of that and have a quick victory. How are they going to do that? Well, they were going to do that with a decisive move into France. Well, I guess some of you have to go, right? How many of you? 4? Okay. Well, you guys go. We're going to keep going.
We'll say good things about that.
Okay. Well, we're going to keep going. Now, World War I begins with the Balkans, but it may not have begun there. It may have started somewhere else. Wilhelm II was flexing his muscles all over the place, including Morocco. Morocco was a French-controlled territory, as you probably know, in North Africa. If you want to remember where Morocco is, you just remember the old song. You can look up the old song. We're off on the road to Morocco. It's a pretty good movie, too, by the way, if you like old movies. We're off on the road to Morocco. Where is it? It's just south of Spain. There you go. Morocco is just south of Spain. And this was a territory which the French had, in their empire, had taken over, along with Algeria and Tunisia, for example. A lot of North Africa, the French had come to control. So this is a place where Kaiser Wilhelm was sort of poking the bear, as we say, poking the French, and saying, okay, we're going to go down here to North Africa, because the people of Morocco wanted their independence, and of course the French didn't want them to be independent. If you want to understand a lot of problems that France is having today, say with a lot of Muslims in France, I can tell you where most of them are coming from: Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Because those are French territories, French colonies, and so a lot of those people have moved to France. They moved there to do manual labor and for opportunities and things like that. And so there's a huge population then of North African former French colonies that are in France. But that's a discussion for another day. But that's what's here. So what does he do? Of course, he hears that Morocco wants independence. He knows that that would make the French upset. And guess what? He would like to make the French upset. Remember the old principle, I mention it many times in every course just about I teach. My enemy's enemy is my friend. I think that's a good one to remember. not only for history but for life. It'll help explain a lot of things that happen to you or that happen in the world if you realize that my enemy's enemy is my friend. That means you end up having people team up who really have nothing in common except the fact they have a common enemy. Okay? Well, this is why, college classes work so well. You all have a common enemy in me, and then it teams you up even though you're very different. You have one thing in common. We don't like that guy. And so then you work together, you commiserate, you have all this stuff. Oh, I can't believe that assignment, can't believe that test. Yeah, can you believe what he said? No. See? Hey, there you go. So this is what happens. And it happens in business, it happens in life, it happens in war, it happens in diplomacy, it happens all over the place. So it's a good principle to keep in mind. My enemy's enemy is my friend. But I guess when that stops is when that enemy is no longer a threat. Okay. Well, if you have brothers and sisters, you understand this principle. Right? Let's say there's 3 children in a family. The alliances will form at different times. Right? Maybe the 2 younger ones will go after the older one, or maybe, the 2 boys go after the girl. I mean, it's just whatever. I mean, the two will team up for a short period of time on a particular issue, and then it'll change the next day. That is what I'm talking about. And so here, does Kaiser Wilhelm really care about Moroccan rights and independence? I don't think so.
Just wants to talk to French, basically.
He wants to get the French going and give them trouble. And so he hears the Moroccans want independence, so you know what? He goes down there. He even goes and visits there in 1905, and he says, you know what? I support your push for independence. That makes the French very mad. And they're thinking, what's this guy doing? Is he going to try to muscle in Morocco? Is he going to try to stir up trouble? What's he doing? Because the French not only did not want to get rid of Morocco, they wanted to move it more into their sphere of control, moving it from what they called a protectorate to a colony. In other words, that was a more formalized colonial thing. Well, the French were outraged. And the French are very good at being outraged. They often get outraged. And they make rumors of war. That was fine. That's in fact what Kaiser Wilhelm kind of wanted. He would have loved to have the French declare war on him. So they would have made World War I a lot better for him in the end. He could have said, hey, we weren't the aggressors. He still tried to say that. But anyway, it didn't work. And in fact, it didn't end there. That threat kind of cooled off. But in 1911, he actually even sent some gunboats down to sort of help the Moroccans out. Just kind of sail in and say, hey, we're here if you guys want to do something. That never did explode. But what I'm saying is World War I could have started, instead of in the Balkans, it could have started in Morocco. This is another principle we need to keep in mind. When we take a look at, say, any war or conflict, and maybe other things too, but certainly just talk about war for the moment, we can talk about the immediate cause of a war, and then we could talk about the underlying cause of the war. The underlying cause of World War I is that, Germany wanted to isolate out France, and Germany wanted to expand into Eastern Europe, and Germany wanted to build their empire. The immediate cause of World War I is not going to be Morocco, it's going to be the Balkans. In other words, they were looking for a reason to have the conflict. Right? Well, this happens. This happens in life too. Some guy's in a bad mood, he just wants just have somebody say something to you. Just anybody. Come on. Why? Because they just want to slug somebody. So you just happen to be the guy that walks in and you say something they don't like, and boom, everything is unloaded on you that this guy is upset about. It's got nothing to do with you, really. You're just the thing that precipitated. In chemistry, I studied chemistry when I was an undergrad. I have a biology major and a chemistry minor. Precipitate is a good word. You can have a reaction going on, but all of a sudden it precipitates, and the precipitant just falls out of solution all at once. You keep adding, stirring, adding, and then all of a sudden, boom, it all happens at once. That's what's going on here. Precipitates the war. Well, that's going to actually be in the Balkans. So if we take a look at the Balkans then, we see that Austria is threatened by Slavic unity. You know, Austria was trying to do something pretty difficult. They were trying to build their empire down here in the area to the south of them, what we would call the Balkan states today. And basically, they're trying to get this territory that had been part of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire in the 19th century is called the sick old man of Europe. We still debate whether, it's part of Europe, right? This part, certainly people say it's part of Europe. And Ottoman Empire had been around, for about 1,000 years. It's been around for a long time, and it controlled the territories of North Africa, Egypt, the Middle East, Turkey, and this part of Europe, as well as areas that would today be, over in Iran, Iraq, up around the Caspian Sea. It was a huge empire, but it had gotten weaker as it got older and more decentralized, and many people started wanting to chomp away at parts of it, including the French, the British, the Austrians, the Russians. So the Russians are looking at this territory, and the Austrians are looking at this territory because everybody knows the Ottoman Empire is weak. This is prime for taking. Prime for taking this territory. Here you can see it says Bulgaria is still part of the Ottoman Empire. Serbia had tried to break away. They had broken away. Greece had broken away earlier. You had Albania, Bosnia, and so forth. Bosnia then had been incorporated into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austria had moved into Hungary, and now they've moved into Bosnia. The problem, of course, the challenge, we don't, you're not supposed to say problems anymore. Nobody has problems. They only have challenges. Okay, the challenges for Austria, let's be politically correct. There are no problems. There are only answers. There's only solutions. There are only challenges for which have a solution. Anyway, the challenge that they have, for which they never find the solution, I hate to say it, for them, is that they're trying to build an empire with a multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic, multi-religious set of people, groups, and territory, and they're going to try to homogenize it and make it an empire under Austria, right? Which is Roman Catholic, speaks German, and is definitely European. Hungary was actually people that actually came from Central Asia. The Hungarians had settled there, right? The Magyars had settled there much earlier on. They spoke Hungarian is a very different language, much more akin to, say, Turkish and Central Asian languages than it is anything in Europe. And of course, the other thing that happens here, a place like Bosnia is Muslim. Many of those people had converted to Islam long ago when it became a part of the Ottoman Empire. So they are Muslim, and they speak Croatian. Then you've got Serbia. They speak Serbian, which is a Slavic language. And so we see that what the Austrians are going to try to do is carve out this territory down to the sea and sort of get all of this territory in their empire. I think that was maybe the master plan. You've also got the Russians just off the map over here past Romania and Bulgaria. The Russians are wanting to move into this area as well. And the Ottomans, of course, their power is shrinking. Okay? So what the Ottomans are going to lose, the question is, who's going to gain? The Austrians want it and the Russians want it. Now the Russians sort of have an in here, especially with the Serbs and the Bulgarians and others. Why? Because they are all Slavic people. Their languages are not identical, but they're similar. Their culture is similar. Their religion is similar. They are Eastern Orthodox Christians. Eastern Orthodoxy, we don't have time to go into it, but it's very much culturally based, but it sees as its center Constantinople, or Istanbul, which had been taken over by the Ottomans. And the center of the Eastern Orthodox had moved to Russia, when Constantinople fell. It's still there, but a lot of that had been inherited by the Russians. The Russians saw themselves as sort of the big brother of all the other Slavs. They have the biggest country, have the biggest military, they have the most money, And aren't we all sort of cousins or brothers or whatever you want to call it, right? Nephew. So we will come down. And if you even look today, or even a more recent time, let's say in the 1990s, when Serbia was having so much trouble and fighting wars, the people that could negotiate with them were the Russians. Why? Because they have an affinity, an identity. And in fact, the Russians wanted to play on that. They called it Pan-Slavism. Pan-Slavism. So Austria is being threatened by Slavic unity. That's what I mean. Pan-Slavism brought into place by the Russians. All right. So the Serbs, the Bulgarians, the Romanians, the Greeks all wanted to gain independence. Greece had done that. Serbia had done that. Bulgarians want to do that. The Romanians want to do that. The Bosnians had wanted to do that, but then they got quickly gobbled up by the Austrians.
Pan-Slavism was the Slavic unity or whatever?
Pan-Slavism is Slavic unity based upon the Slavic language, which the group of Slavic languages includes Russian, includes Bulgarian. Polish, no. Well, to some extent Polish, yes. It's not quite the same. But yes, there are Slavs in Poland. And so a lot of Eastern Europe, and especially down here in the Balkans, Russia is trying to build that unity basically to sort of build their empire. They're building a Russian empire. Yes?
So what are Poles then?
Poles, mostly they're Slav. They're Slavic people. They are mostly Slavic people. They are not quite as culturally the same as the Slavs down here because they are Roman Catholic. The Poles had been converted to Roman Catholicism, which made them more Western looking. Plus, they had been incorporated into Napoleon's empire, which also made for some different alliances. But yes, ethnically they're Slavs. Their language is Slavic. They would, although they would not want to be identified with the Russians as much as, say, the Serbs. Anyway, the bottom line here is that the Serbs wanted territory for a greater Serbia. They also wanted to expand their holdings. They felt that Serbia should include Bosnia and some other territories, parts of Bulgaria and Romania, should be a greater Serbia. Well, the Serbs do get some independence. The Greeks got independence. Eventually, the Romanians will get their independence. And you've got Turkey, or the Ottoman Turks. Even within the Ottoman Turks, there's upheaval because there are Turks who want to get rid of the Ottoman Empire, which is Turkish, which may seem not to fit, but it does because they didn't like the Sultan and they wanted to control things themselves. And within the Ottoman Empire, there were a lot of ethnic groups, and they just wanted to be for Turks. Well, anyway, let's move on. So it's a very complicated area, very fragmented. That's why it's called Balkanization. When somebody says the Balkanization of someplace, still use that today. The Balkanization of a country means it's fragmented into different ethnic and linguistic groups. And that's what's happening here. It had been all the Ottoman Empire. Now it's dividing into lots of different things. So here is a map that just shows us what it looks like. You can see Russia up in the upper right corner. You can see Romania, Bulgaria, and I want you to notice the mountainous areas. There's Hungary and Austria. See up above there's Slovakia, and up above that's the Czech Republic. This is a more modern map. Okay? All right, so this is where it's going to happen, and basically the territory of Serbia is going to double. They're going to be expanding. They want to move into the territories of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which are small territories nearby. But the Austrians gained Bosnia in 1908 from the Ottomans. So this creates a very tense situation as we enter into, this is another flashpoint, like Morocco, even more so, because there's more players. Down in Morocco, it's really just the French, and the Germans go down and kind of try to stir things up. Here, they don't need to stir things up. They're already stirred up because the Ottomans are failing, the Russians want in, the Austrians want in, Serbia wants a bigger chunk of pie, and so forth. So, nationalism is a very important force in the 19th century and early 20th century. Nationalism is another thing to remember that sort of fuels a lot of the idea of war. Nationalism means, I identify with a certain nation and my nation is the best. Therefore, my nation should win, my nation should control. I have symbols of my nation, the flag and other things like that. And so that has done a lot to shape things in Europe and really around the world in the 19th century, early 20th century. What we see now growing, which there's kind of a backlash now, is this sort of internationalism, right? Which is what they've been trying to propose and bring forth with, like say the United Europe, right? The EEC, the EEU. England's sort of pulling out of that now. The United States has really been involved in this internationalism, and now it appears we are going to be backing out of that to some extent. So anyway, nationalism is a critical element for the onset of World War I. It's going to lead to the buildup of arms. It's going to lead to the idea that we, that being our nation, is better than them, us and them, whether we are Germany and they are France or whatever. We are Russia and they are Austria. And as I've already said, Germany and Italy are playing what I call catch-up. They're trying to catch up. Italy had also been fragmented until 1870, Germany until 1871. But Germany's really going to hit on this to try to build empire. But Italy does as well. They're just not quite as successful about it. But yes, they're both there. And what do they have to catch up on? Empire building, expansion of territory and economies, and industrialization. Something we certainly haven't talked about in here is that during the 19th century there's a huge industrial revolution that takes place. That begins in England and then moves elsewhere. Germany and Italy had been kind of left out. There were parts of Germany who had industrialized, parts of Italy that industrialized. In fact, it was those parts that lead the unification of those territories, like Prussia. Prussia was the most industrialized part of Germany. So to me, it's no accident. They're the ones that end up controlling all of Germany. The Piedmont was the most industrialized part of Italy, and they end up controlling all of Italy. All right, let's then get to the flashpoint, which you all know. June 28, 1914. This is where we say World War I got started. But remember, this is the immediate cause, not the underlying cause. Archduke Ferdinand was down in Bosnia. He had been sent there on a kind of, diplomatic sort of thing. Go down and greet people, ride in a car in a parade, or at least a procession. He is then assassinated, as you know, by a Bosnian who's a member of the Black Hand Society, which is a Serbian terrorist group that this guy was involved with. The idea here is that the Serbs want to expand into this territory. And so when this happens then, the question then comes, what does Austria do? Because Archduke Ferdinand is basically like the Prince Charles of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In other words, right now, Queen Elizabeth is the queen. Prince Charles would be the next king if and when she ever dies. She will die someday, right? But this would be killing off the next in line. So this is a big deal. To the Austrians, it's a very big deal, right? So basically, what are they going to do? Well, the Austrians know, as my mother used to say, which side their bread is buttered on, right? Who's giving them the butter? Who's going to give them the money? So they talk to the Germans about this. Here is a picture of the prince, or the Archduke, in his vehicle. This is before the gunfire. His driver doesn't know the roads well, and when the gunfire starts, he turns down a road to get out of the main road, but he turns into an alley that's kind of a dead end. And this allows the gunman to chase him in there and continue firing. You can see in the background a minaret because this is a mosque. This reminds us this is a Muslim area. Majority of people here are Muslims, still today. So this is also part of the tension. It's a different language. It's a different culture. It's also a different religion. They are Muslims in Europe. They don't really fit with the Roman Catholics of Austria. They don't really fit with the Orthodox of the Serbians. So Austria ends up issuing an ultimatum to the Serbs. So there's the picture, a little closer. I guess we're out of time, right? When's this class over? 10:50? So what I think what I might do, I might try to finish some of this in my office and post the rest of it. All right. Another one? This one? Okay. All right, so we'll end it there for today, and we'll see you on Friday.